This is the Cuphead 2.0, and it's a club that's been about 15 years in the making, and 2.0 is a really good name for it. Niels came up with that, because the first Cupheads were made about 15 years ago by Tom of Renegade Juggling. He took the Fathead club, which had a rounded top, and he just cut it off, and then flipped that part over and sealed it back on, so there would be a place to catch a ball at the top of the club. But this 2.0 Cuphead, it's a complete redesign, and I first started working on a new version of the Cuphead with Will, and we were, this about, 10 years ago, we were trying to find a way to manufacture them in a one-piece design. So this is a one-piece club. There's no dowel in the middle, it's just one big piece of plastic. And the reason we did that is because the clubs that Tom was making were great. I mean, what a cool idea. And also really smart to just take an existing club and modify it in a really small way to add such a different function of it. But I was coming up with some tricks and techniques that were going to take a few years to learn. They were quite complicated. And the clubs from Tom, because of the abuse I was putting them through, they kept breaking. And partly that was because of the modular design. So after a while I said, well, I don't want to start working on this technique anymore. I don't want to keep learning it for years and years until I have a solid object that I knew I could rely on. As well, Tom's were, even though really well made, of course the Fathead is a production club, but then the Cuphead was a modification, and they were handmade individually, which he did a great job on them, but just the minute variations of human error here and there, it meant that the tricks I was trying to do with the first Cupheads, you started to have different clubs you needed to have in a certain place in a certain order in order for the tricks to work. Sometimes if there was a ball on top and you were going to throw and the object split, the ball would just go a millimeter higher using this club than the other club, and you had to start to keep track which club was which. And it wasn't a very sustainable way to move forward with the technique. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get a one-piece club. It's not going to have any variations in it. There won't be any parts that can break, not even a handle, a joint between the body and the handle and the knob. And so I started working with that, with Will on that about 10 years ago. And I think we had originally found a manufacturer that could possibly make them in China. But there was a minimum order of something like 5,000 units, and then I only needed 10 of them for my life, a set of 5 to use and 5 to keep in case one breaks somehow. And then I'd have, 4,990 clubs sitting around somewhere. So I didn't go for that at the time. I do remember though, it was kind of fun. It was going to cost $1.50 per club, and that includes shipping. So that was kind of a fun metric to learn back then, to say, okay, well that's still, of course, with 5,000 clubs, that's going to be a lot of money, but it's not mysterious. I mean, you can know how much something like that would cost. And in the end, of course, $1.50 for a club that's shipped from China to America, that's not bad. But then, obviously, the years went on, and I still wanted to try to solve the problem and not end up with 5,000 clubs, because I don't have a place to store them. And also, I'm not a prop manufacturer, reseller. I wasn't going to get into the prop selling business of selling off all the extra Cupheads and shipping and customer support and all these things. And I did look around at different prop manufacturers to see if anybody wanted to collaborate with me, that I could go in on the order with them and maybe get the clubs made, and then they could take the extra ones and sell them through like Henry's or Babash or Dubé or Renegade or whoever. And for whatever reason, those details didn't go through either. So I was still left without a Cuphead. And then maybe about 3 years ago, I wanted to get back into the project because I started collaborating with a guy named Drew. And Drew lives in Las Vegas, and he's really into 3D printing, among other things. And so we had made a bunch of projects together, and I came back to this idea of the Cuphead. And I asked Drew if he could make me a 3D printed version of the Cuphead that we could start to iterate the design. The first Cuphead that Tom had made, it comes from the Fathead Club, and that was never intended, to catch a ball in there necessarily. I mean, you could physically do it, and I did it for years. I still in fact use the Renegade Cupheads in my show with Eric. We haven't switched to the 2.0s yet. So obviously they work, you can catch a ball in there, but it was never researched, it was never really intentionally designed to catch a ball. It was just happenstance that it was a rounded shape that you cut off and flipped over and it became a cup. But the shape of the cup, to be honest, it was quite hard to catch a ball. At least to catch a ball consistently. And you can ask Eric this because we have this duet that we use Cupheads in our show. And yeah, we spent years trying to learn it to not drop the ball. And I mean, eventually we could figure out the technique of not dropping the ball, but it was really a little bit counterintuitive how difficult it was to catch the ball and keep it there consistently. Again, it wasn't hard to catch the ball, but then all of a sudden you'd catch a ball, and then the ball just wouldn't be in the cup. And you're like, what is happening? And part of the reason is because of the shape of the first Cuphead cup. So with Drew, the first thing we started with was the shape of a ball. So he just modeled the shape of a ball on a computer software and literally just bisected it and grafted it onto the end of a club model on the computer. And then he 3D printed it. And so this is one of the very first prototypes of the Cuphead 2.0. And there's a couple of fun things to say about it. The first one is that in the very first version, not this one, this is maybe the 4th or 5th actual revision of the design. But in the first version of the design with Drew, when the ball sat into the top of the cup head, I'd say about 1/3 of the ball was visible. So the walls of the cup was much higher. And this had a couple of effects. The first effect is that it was so easy to catch the ball. It was like there was a vacuum, like sucking the ball into the cup every time, like a magnet was there. But the other part of it was that visually, the wall was so high, you'd only see the top part of the ball. And it almost just ended up looking exactly like the original fathead shape. And you couldn't really see the ball so much. In fact, it turned into going from 2 objects. Theatrically, it ended up looking only like 1 object instead of another object resting on top of another one. And I thought that for my performances theatrically, from an aesthetic viewpoint for the audience, I'd still like them to be 2 separate shapes. I just wanted one shape to rest on top of the other one. So with the higher cup wall, when the ball went into the club, it just looked like 1 object, and that wasn't really the visual effect I wanted to do. So we started to experiment with different depths of the cup and different shapes of the walls and heights, and we came up with this design. So here in this ball, you can see these little ducks inside the ball as filling, and when I put it into the club, you can still see that the ducts are visible in the club, and that's because the wall has been lowered significantly. And now I would say about 1/3 of the ball is in the cup and 2/3 is visible, which is the opposite of the very first prototype we made. And I'd say the trade-off of that visual effect is that you lose about, I would say, 5% accuracy in catching the ball. But yeah, maybe I understated how easy it was to catch the ball in the first version. Instead of 100% accuracy, it was like more like 1,000% accuracy. So losing about 5% accuracy to catch the ball it's really not a problem. Catching a ball in here is just, it's crazy. I don't know if this is gonna work this time, but you can really, you can catch the ball sideways. Like it's just, look at this. The club is sideways, you still catch the ball. It's really good. It's really designed exactly for the shape of a ball. And so the accuracy on this new model is just so much better. The other thing to talk about is that since we were 3D printing the clubs, we could kind of make any part of them any shape that we wanted. And the original design was based really on the first Cuphead from Tom. And that's because I had developed a bunch of technique with Tom's clubs that I wanted to push farther. And so we thought, well, instead of redesigning the entire length of the body, we should kind of map it 1-to-1 just to kind of keep the consistency there of the techniques that I was trying to do. But one thing I did want to do is that on the first version of the Cupheads, I always wanted to put a ball on the knob and use it as a club stand. And so now we had that ability, right, with the 3D printing to make it any shape we wanted. And so this is actually the first shape we tried to use for the knob to catch a ball in there with a little indentation. And you can see it's a little bit wider and flared out than the production version. In the end, this edge was going to be a little bit too brittle, perhaps, or prone to breaking for the production model we ended up making. So we still have the knob that you can use it as a ball stand, but this first version was much more stable, just to say. And we had to change the shape because of the way we manufactured the final commercial release. But here it's really nice using it as a ball stand. And just to say, this indentation in the knob, while it is potentially a feature of technique where you could catch a ball in there and do other sorts of tricks using that shape of that knob, just to say, it was just very selfishly from the beginning from me that I wanted to have a ball stand. That was kind of my original idea, like, oh hey, you know, this club stands up on its end really well, like it stands up super nicely because of the wide base. And then I just wanted to put a ball on top of the knob and have it just be kind of a prop stand. And that's what the function of that came from. And of course, you can catch a ball there. It's a little bit difficult, tricky. I mean, definitely completely different than catching it in the other end. But placing the ball there, it's not too bad. It works pretty good in juggling tricks, but do a placement instead of a catch. And the other fun thing is that because of this flared base on the original version, actually it stands up quite well the other way too, which was kind of cool. We didn't really think about that originally. And then you have a ball stand this way, which was kind of nice. And this works, this version works a little bit with the production model we have now, but it works even better with this the original shape of the knob there. And the other thing to say about this first prototype is that, so this is a 3D print right here. It's actually a really gorgeous 3D print by Drew. And I have to say, when I flip it, it feels perfect. I mean, it's just amazing. It's amazingly balanced. It's the perfect weight. And so when I first got these samples from Drew, I opened the package and took them out. And I was like, wow, this is cool. It's 3D printed. It's really beautiful. And I thought, well, this isn't going to juggle very good because, yeah, it's 3D printed and we didn't do weight distribution or any sort of, research into that. And then I did a flip and I thought, wow, this is the perfect club. They do flip amazingly. They flip perfectly. And so I thought, well, now we're done. Now I've solved my 15-year or whatever, Cuphead journey. I have my Cuphead. And so I went to juggle the 3 of them and tried a couple of tricks, and I dropped one. And so this is actually the first one that I dropped. And this is after one drop. So literally the first drop from just like waist height, like a single flip throw, it just fell on the floor. I think it was even a wooden floor. It wasn't even a concrete floor, and just shattered into a million pieces. So that was pretty depressing to find out that the 3D printing wasn't going to work for the actual, final club that we were going to make. Here's a second version that sustained one drop. So after one drop, this split in two, and this shattered out. And here you can see a little bit, again, we were playing with the depth of the cup for the visual of the ball when it was in the top of the club. So this is another sort of prototype version number 3, I think. But you can see that, yeah, 3D printing did not sustain any sort of juggling practice. And so here was the final 3D print prototype. And this has the production design of the knob on it, the redesign for the molding of the actual creation of the club. And obviously it's quite a bit different shape than the first one, a lot smaller, but also then a lot more solid and more sturdy, so it won't break when you drop it on the edge of of the knob. But still, it works really, really well as a ball stand at the very least. And sometimes if you have a nice level surface, it still stands up pretty good, which is nice. And again, this 3D print version of the final design with the appropriate depth of the cup is just beautiful to juggle. I wish, I really wish, well, I take that back, I wish nothing, and there I flipped it too much. So you can see for yourself exactly the durability of the 3D print. I mean, that's literally probably the most I've ever flipped it in my life. We as soon as I saw the clubs would shatter, I just stopped trying to juggle them because, well, you just saw why. It's just useless. And this prototype really was only made to confirm the final design for the manufacturing. So that's fun. That's why they're not 3D printed. And maybe in the future, 3D prints will become sustainable for the abuse that juggling takes. But even just doing a single flip now and then it cracks off. So yeah, that's why we ended up making this one here. And this is the final commercial release. These were roto-molded in China. And yeah, check this out. It doesn't break. It's pretty nice. So yeah, this is one piece of plastic, but it's really, really thick. It's not 3D printed. It's roto-molded. And I know so much more now about how to manufacture plastic objects than I ever wanted to. And in fact, in the end, Will really helped us. So Drew made the 3D prints, and then Will worked with me for about 8 to 9, maybe 10 months on trying to find a manufacturer who could make the final design out of actual real plastic molding. And that process, it was a couple times a week for months and months and months, and it was looking pretty hopeless for a long time just because it was prohibitive. The cost was so high to do any sort of actual industrial run of this. And I was really actually ready to give up again, or shelve the project again, after we'd been looking for about a half a year at prices and manufacturing and minimum run orders and per unit costs and all these things. But in the end, we got really lucky and everything just kind of lined up. I remember I was in Norway visiting Captain Frodo, and we were working on a show together. And I went to the grocery store. I was in the parking lot, and I remember being really vividly being in the parking lot of this grocery store, walking around, talking on the phone to Drew, who was back in Vegas. And I was just telling Drew, like, hey man, this final prototype, the design is perfect, it's amazing. We've been looking for a half a year now into manufacturing them, but the numbers don't work out. It was gonna cost like $50,000, and I was gonna have to order, 10,000 clubs, things like this. And I was just like, I can't. Theoretically, like that could be a goal to work towards, but I'm not even interested to try to make that happen. So I was really like, I'm out of ideas. I really remember standing in the parking lot vividly, talking to Drew, being like, hey, I'm out of ideas. Like, I think we're gonna have to shelve this project for now and come back to it later. And actually that next month, I went to the IJA and ran into Niels there. And already before that, Niels had, we'd been talking a little bit about 3D printing of props. And because I had this experience from Drew with 3D printing props, we had a little conversation about that. And then at the IJA, I started talking to Niels about the Cuphead, and he mentioned his bottle clubs, which if you haven't seen, they're super cool. And so he had been roto-molding his bottle clubs, and we decided to, he proposed that, hey, maybe I can help you make the Cuphead, and here we are. It's just so amazing, and I really thank Will and Niels and Drew and Tom. Without those people, this wouldn't exist. And so it's really strange to stand here 15 years later and actually hold this thing in my hand. And so I want to tell you a little bit about this production model. So it came in 2 colors. First came with, I got the blue, and then we also had a gray manufactured at first. And now, of course, Niels is making different colors. Here's a couple of samples he sent me. There's there's the red, and then of course the orange. And so I think he's even doing some other colors after that, and different sorts of samples from the factory. And I have a bunch of old samples in my in my studio too, of different sorts of weights and thicknesses of plastic. And so it took us a few prototypes to really get down to the final commercial release of what we were happy with, that we could share with anybody and that I could use for my juggling practice with them. And so as part of that, I want to explain a little bit about the type of plastic we used and the process of that. So this is a sample plate of different sort of textures from the factory in China of how the plastic feels. And there's different sorts of, this is like a number 1, number 2, number 3, and it's different sorts of rough or smoothness of the plastic. And so this was kind of the options of like, what could we do? How can we make the plastic feel in your hand? And so on the final version of the club, we tried a bunch of different things, but the cup is completely smooth, as is the indentation in the knob. And then for the body and the handle of the club, there's just the finest little texture. And this was, I have to say, the best option out of everything we had. I don't think in the end it's maybe the perfect or the final version or the final option, but of what we could do, I mean, this was definitely the best. This smooth part in the cup, you could maybe imagine that if it was smooth like that, the entire, especially on the handle, it is just like, for me, it was just like glass. So I thought, well, at the very least, we have this texture here on the handle. And later on, when I start talking about the technique of how to use the cup heads with in the juggling tricks, you'll see that a lot of the tricks I end up holding onto the body of the club instead of the handle. And I find that texture for holding onto the body, actually, I like it. The texture on the handle, there's a couple of things I learned. The first one is that when I got the final version, the final sample before we did the actual run, the actual manufacturing of the first batch, the whole first batch, I got the club and I felt the texture that I had, selected. I forget which number this is. You can look it up on the email, but it's like number 2 texture or whatever. And we had tried a couple different textures and thought, okay, let's dial it in with number 2, whatever it was. And I got the club and I thought, oh yeah, this is nice. This feels great. And in fact, right now I have to say it feels really great to my hands. But then I had a show that day with Eric, and I was so excited. I took the samples to the show, and before the show I gave them to Eric and said, hey, what do you think of this? It's like the final proof before we go ahead and do the big order. And he picked it up and it just slipped straight out of his hands. And he was like, man, I do not like the texture on the handle. That's terrible, it's so slippery. And then I pick up the club and I juggle it like I'm doing right now, and I go, that feels great. And it took me a few weeks to figure out that actually, when your hands are completely dry, this is just super slippery. It just slips out of your hand like glass, or like you're holding a piece of ice or whatever, or soap. So if you have super, super dry hands, I think this texture, it's really slippery. So, because I figured that out a few weeks later, I had really dry hands. I picked these up and I was like, oh, now I get what Eric was talking about. So the thing I do sometimes if I'm using these clubs with just unmodified is I'll go and wash my hands and then dry them really good. So they're not still wet, but there is some sort of moisture in the skin. And then it goes back to feeling good again. And yeah, that's just the reality of how it is. Again, the other option was just to have it completely smooth, like the inside of the cup. And I think for my taste, I had a couple of prototypes of that and I just couldn't, it was just slippery all the time. So the other thing I like about the texture is it gives it a really nice little soft aesthetic, and it really looks like a beautiful object. I mean, it's made out of plastic, sure, but it still looks like a nicely designed, high quality object. Like, I really love how it looks just aesthetically. And I know in terms of juggling, aesthetics is maybe secondary to function, right? So that if it's so slippery and it's just laying on the ground, you go, oh wow, it's really beautiful club laying on the ground. Why didn't you catch it? But just to say, there is a nice quality of the diffusion of light off its surface because of this texture. And even when my hands are dry and the handle feels really slippery to me, for some reason, when I catch the fat end with dry hands, it doesn't bother me as much. Like it still feels like grippy, more grippy than having a smooth surface. And like I say, just running my hand under some water and drying them off well, so there, there's not still water on them, but there's some moisture in my skin, seems to take care of it. But of course, on the other hand, you can go ahead and modify the handles of these clubs, or the rest of them as well, which I've started to experiment with. But they're so new, I'm not so far along. Already you can see in the 3D printed prototypes, we started to tape the handles just to see how that would feel, not only in terms of the grip, but also in terms of the weight and the balance. And so I think, the first prototypes without tape on them, they still felt great to me. In terms of 3D printed prototype, I thought, wow, these are really cool. But yeah, in the end, some tape was nice to help with the grip and also a little bit the balance. And we even went as far as, on this prototype, this was a really cool experiment. You probably can't really see it, this little white coloration around the knob. But this has been coated with something you might call tool dip. And it's if you have like a hammer or pliers or something, there's like a rubber coating you can dip the handle of those tools into that gives them more grip. And this feels amazing. In fact, I had Drew make me some 3D printed balls for some other things we were working on, and he actually coated them in this tool dip. This is a clear version of it, and they just feel amazing. It's so nice. It has a little bit of grip, but it's not sticky. So it's a little bit more slippery than covering a ball with a balloon, for example. And so this was a really cool experiment of covering the handle and the knob in this sort of rubber, translucent rubber coating. But I think for large scale manufacturing or distribution, it's just not sustainable. To do that to 500 clubs, he was hand painting on the layers to get the thickness even, and also just to iterate the layers to be like, okay, this is one layer. How does this feel? Is it too heavy? Is it too light? So that was about 3 coats, I think. But we tried different sorts of layering and stuff. And so, yeah, we didn't find a sustainable manufacturing process for that. But obviously you can do that if you want. You can find different versions of that kind of coating to put on the handle of this club or anything else you want. But of course, the most simple thing you can do if you want to change the feel of your handle on this 2.0 Cuphead is just use standard electrical tape. And then the other added bonus of that is you can make it whatever color you want, and you can get a contrasting color or whatever you want to do. And of course, it's just super, super easy to change it if it gets sticky or old or sort of torn up or whatever you want to do, right? It's just super easy. So you can always tape the handles and the clubs, and I don't think that for me, this kind of tape doesn't really change the balance at all. It just changes the feel of it. And I've actually had a couple different types of electrical tape I've been using. So for example, this black tape here, believe it or not, has a very different feel than this black electrical tape. So I don't know, I'm not that much of an expert on tape, probably know more about tape than I ever want to as well, but this tape feels really, really nice to me. And this tape is pretty slippery, so I don't know. You got to play around. If you tape up the handles with electrical tape and you don't like them, maybe don't give up yet. Maybe just try to buy a different brand from a different place and see, because I have had different experiences with different sorts of electrical tape. But another thing that people have been doing, this idea came to me from Lowry. Lowry had been doing this, and I decided to try it. And this is just like tennis racket handle padding, cushioning wrap, or whatever. You buy this for tennis rackets or badminton rackets, actually. And of course, it comes in a bunch of different colors here. So for example, I found this gray one that matches the color of the gray pretty good. And you can wrap your handle up that way. And it gives a lot of cushioning and gives a lot of grip. And it also is heavy enough to slightly change the center of gravity, the center of rotation on the flip. And Lowry likes that, and I definitely feel it here. And I think for certain tricks I like it, and for other tricks I'm not such a fan of having that change in the design, because when Drew and I prototyped the first prints, of course that was part of it, thinking about how the club's going to flip. But definitely in the manufacturing process in China, the way we make them now with this roto molding, we don't have a lot of control besides the initial design. It's really hard to kind of tweak the center of gravity once you have your mold made. And of course, a lot of plastic is formed up around here in the cup because, well, you can see there's just a lot of walls there and a lot of shapes and curves that meet, a lot of angles that meet together. So of course, plastic collects there. And then you end up with a flip. I think this flip feels really nice to me, but I'm also doing a very specific technique with my juggling using them. And so others might find that the flip to be a little bit difficult for other sorts of tricks. But one thing you can definitely try then is to use this sort of handle wrap here to give this cushioning and give a little bit of a different flip. The one thing to say though is if you go for this kind of handle wrap, is that it definitely adds a lot of bulk to the handle. And I have to say that already from the beginning, the handles, well, we can say it's thicker than thinner, right? Like you could conceivably have a thinner handle in the design, but I happen to have really big hands, so, and not to be so selfish, but they feel really, really good to me. And this was just based on the first, the Cuphead that Tom made. And of course, Renegade had the wrapped handles and the two-piece clubs. So when Drew modeled this, he just modeled those clubs, and we ended up with a little bit of a thicker handle, I would say, than a thinner one. For people with small hands, like to collect 3 or 4 in one hand, I would definitely say that this handle is thicker than thinner. But if you do that tennis racket wrap here on the handle, it makes it even thicker. So just be aware of that. And especially when you're catching 2 and 3 clubs in one hand, I even notice it with my big hands. At the same time, I think you get used to it, and if it's something you like, then you're going to enjoy that. For me, it felt pretty weird. I do enjoy this club with the wrap for certain kinds of tricks, and other kinds of tricks, they don't really work. So that's another thing to keep in mind. You can always change these handle wraps out as you go. If you're working on different sorts of tricks, it's really, really easy to change it out. But the last thing I've been playing around with is modifying the production clubs into this. And I think this is more or less probably going to be what I use when I make my juggling act with the Cupheads. I'm going to use something like this. So this club here, this pretty much feels to me like the perfect club of both worlds, of all the worlds, the perfect club in the universe for the Cuphead. We went ahead and did the one-piece design for production because the manufacturing process, and it was just, we didn't have the ability to make a 2-piece club. And as well, again, going back to the idea of the original Cuphead that Tom made, the 2-piece design was failing me on some of the techniques. And so I think I'm going to use this club for, I would say, 90% of my work with these clubs. 90% of the technique I've been working on, this works awesome, and I would take these on the road and I would put these in my normal show. But I do want to make a really special act with the Cupheads, these tricks I've been working on for 15 years. And for those tricks, I'd say modifying this handle into a dolphin handle, it changed the grip enough, and I use dolphins in my life anyway. So it really makes the flip feel familiar to me. And at the very, very hardest tricks I'm doing with Cupheads, I think I'm going to use it with the modded dolphin handle. For everything else, for playing around, for hanging out with my son, juggling Cupheads, for juggling with other jugglers at festivals, and for trying to find new tricks, I'm totally using these. These are great. But for the very, very hardest things that I've been working on in my life, I'm probably going to go ahead and use the modded version with the dolphin handle. And if you want to mod yours, I have to say this is not a coincidence that this works really well. I want to tell you how to do it. So when we first made the prototypes, we knew that if you wanted to, you could cut the handle off and mod them into some sort of dolphin or pirouette or loop handle if you want to. So basically, I have to say this is at your own risk. This is nothing we're on the hook for if you mess this up and it doesn't work, but I mean, it's just super straightforward. You just take your club, chop it off, just chop it straight off, take a dolphin handle with a dowel. So I have a dowel on the inside and I just run it through the middle, put a little hole in put the screw back in, and you're done. This version here, I did not countersink the hole in the cup yet. This was just the very first version I made of this. And I think in the future I will countersink the hole so that the screw is flush with the bottom of the cup. But even still with this screw head sticking up like, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters, it's unnoticeable when I catch the ball in the cup. It's no problem. But just to have it a little bit more clean in my final version of the mod, I think I'll countersink that hole. But yeah, you just chop off the club. Just this is a standard dolphin handle, standard dolphin, whatever you call that thing that always breaks. What's the name of that? Your center connector there, and I just put the handle, the stick up into the club. The one thing you have to do is you're gonna have to modify the length of the dowel. You're gonna have to compensate for the depth of the cup. So you're gonna have to chop off your dowel. But yeah, you just jam it up there, put your, this knob is off, put your ring back on there. It kind of fits, you can glue it if you want. I didn't put any staples or anything into this. I just have the screw there. And it's a standard dolphin knob. I think I'm gonna change that because I really want to get back to the functionality of, again, the ball stand, eventually, at least for my act. So there's a few different options I have for that. I think I'm going to try to 3D print there's a new type of material to 3D print in that's a little bit spongy or squishy. And so I'm going to try to make a squishy 3D printed knob in the original shape, actually, with the more flared base, and put those on the end. And that's going to be my ultimate Cuphead for now. For the highest technical tricks that I'm trying to do, I think. But these so far have seemed to be virtually indestructible. Of course, there's a failure point of this. These always break on my dolphins anyway, this center band. And so sure, theoretically this could also break out, that was maybe one of the main points of failure from the Tom's Cupheads, is that the dowel with the screw in it would always just shatter out. I would just get that screw would just break the plastic all around it, and the body would just wobble around the dowel. But the manufacturing process we've used to rotomold these new bodies in China with Niels, I mean, there's no way that's going to break out. It's so sturdy and thick, and the type of plastic used as well. It's a high density plastic, so there's no way that's going to split out like it did on the Renegade. And yeah, I don't think you have to mod your handles into some other sort of like two-piece club design unless you're doing really serious, like high-level technique stuff, or if you just like how it feels and you want to have a little project to do over the weekend. Yeah, it's super easy to do, and you can experiment with different types of handles. And like I said, now that we have these kind of shapes here in this one-piece shape, there's a million different ways to start to play with it and to cut it. And like I said, originally Tom had cut the original Fathead and flipped it over and put it back on. Would be hilarious if you wanted to make Cuphead 2.0 Fatheads. You could just cut your cup off and flip it over and have your instant Fathead and go show Tom. That could be fun, conceptual art. But yeah, I mean, there's different things you can do to this. You can drill holes in here, so you could have a kendama club. If you cut a hole here, you catch a ball there and there. Have another hole over here, get your kendama club, catch a ball there. I don't know. So I'm definitely thinking of different ways right now. I'm gonna take my old prototypes that we were getting from China to check out the weight and the textures, and I'm gonna start like cutting them up and combining them in different ways and seeing how we can find some new designs like that. You can also easily do the Holdy Club design with this as well, right? Just like cut a big hole through both sides and you have your one-piece Holdy Club, Cuphead Holdy Club, super cool. When we were originally making these with Drew, we did play around with, on the 3D printed prototypes, having a hole, so it was going to be a Holdy Club Cuphead. And then in the end, I thought for my show, again theatrically for the audience, I just wanted it to be straightforward. I just wanted it to have one function and not be too confusing of like, oh wait, so you catch a ball in there, but also it goes through the other way. The game becomes quickly very complicated, and I wanted it to be really straightforward for the audience to follow. There's something really compelling with the Cuphead about catching the ball in the cup. It's like very satisfying to do somehow, as you know, just to experience it yourself when you actually do that catch. But I think visually it's very concrete. So the concept of this prop theatrically in a show for an audience, it's so simple to understand. Here's a juggling club, everybody gets that. Here's a ball, everybody gets that. And hey, look, it's a modification. You can catch a ball in the end of the club. And I think everybody understands that, and it's a really fun game. It's very visual, it's very easily understandable. You immediately get what's happening, and then you can get deeper into that game of like, oh, what are the different ways you can catch a ball to the end of the club? And of course, other people in the past, you know, have made different sorts of props like that. In my lifetime, the first one I encountered was Janni from Finland, and he had big sort of dishes with wooden sticks on the bottom that he would catch soccer balls in. That was also, of course, a Cuphead. But I think it goes back to that. I never forget when Amaron was talking about creating the magnet clubs, and someone asked him and said, you know, because Amaron put the magnets on either end of the club, and then you could hook the clubs together. And someone said, hey, you know, for example, again, Janni in Finland, he had made sticks with magnets on them. And they said, yeah, but Amaron, like, why don't you just use sticks and put magnets on the sticks, and why are you using clubs? And Amaron said something I'll never forget. He said, you know, there's a real utility in keeping an object that we are familiar with. And so to have a juggling club be an actual juggling club, but also with magnets, it's like you're capitalizing not just so much on magnets, but on everything that clubs are, and then going a step farther. And I think the same thing is true here. Like, I really loved Janni's, again, these kind of big plastic bowls or dishes with a wooden handle, and they would catch a soccer ball there. And yeah, it was super cool. But I think there is some sort of utility of saying, this is still a club, and on top of that, it catches a ball. And maybe it's just a mental construct, that a way, an attitude to approach this prop. I think there is something visual to it as well. I can't really put my finger on it yet or articulate it, but I'm definitely going to keep thinking about it. Because I've seen some people on social media, of course, using the Cuphead 2.0, and there's something so satisfying about it, and it's not just because I've been so involved in the design process and as an object I've wanted my whole life. But rather, there's something I think inherently compelling about having this actual shape, using it as a real club. You can do all the club juggling with this, and then also catch the ball on the top. And the last thing I wanted to show you is that we did actually start to play around with some different designs at the very, very beginning. So of course, the original Cuphead from Tom, the fat head cut off, turned over. Well, the fat head has this shape where, of course, the body expands out at the very, very end. And so Drew actually had this sample. It's pretty cool. And it's a version of a Cuphead where he's moved the fat end of the body down towards the center of the body, which is more like a traditional club, right? So you could say in one way, this is a Cuphead that's not from a fat head, but this is a Cuphead, say, from a dolphin or some sort of European style club, right? Like you take a normal traditional club body that bulges more in the middle of the body and kind of narrows towards the top. And of course, this top is not so narrow because it's made to catch the ball again. So it kind of goes fat here, lower down, and then, yeah, it doesn't quite go as narrow as a normal European club design body would be. But yeah, it looks really nice. I mean, I think this shape looks really odd to me because, well, I'm really used to this shape from the original Cuphead, right? And so I've gotten used to that in my life, but it was kind of a fun experiment he did. And we had a few other prototypes like this, but I wanted to show you this. And Here you can see again another version of the ball stand knob that's 3D printed, and yeah. But this definitely has a total different look to it, obviously, than what we ended up with. But it was still fun to go through that process, and I would say it was the first time I've ever really gone through a design process like this for juggling. I mean, you always hear about like maybe the iPhone or something, right? And Steve Jobs would go into a room and there's a table laid out with 30 different versions of the next iPhone, and he goes, okay, you know, version 10 and 16, let's combine those two designs. And then he goes away and the team makes 30 more versions of combining those two designs, and kind of iterating, this iteration process of making a physical object like this 3D printed prototype that you can hold and look at with your hands and feel it, and what's the experience of having this in front of you in your hand and flipping it and throwing the ball and catching the ball. It's not just a design process on paper, that there's actually a physical iteration of the object. And this is the first time I've ever worked in that way with juggling, which I think obviously a lot of the rest of the design world has worked with for years and years and years, but we don't normally have those resources as jugglers to have that sort of, that same type of process. And this is the first process I've had like that, and it's just been amazing. Just going from that first version of saying, hey Drew, catching the ball on the top, it's amazing compared, because it's an intentional design, whereas the fathead version that Tom made was just a happenstance, like a really cool idea, like a real extra bonus feature. And so just having that ball sit in there perfectly was like, wow, this is cool already. And then going to be able to adjust the depth of the cup and to play around with the thicknesses and the shape and the length and the manufacturing process as well. That's been something that's been really, really valuable in the development of this prop, and hopefully now that this sort of process has been established, we can try to do new things in the future using the same idea of having many different iterations of a prop to find the optimal one, instead of always having to have the startup cost of making an entire new prop, and you just have to pay for it from the beginning and just cross your fingers and hope that, wow, I hope this club is going to work out good, which I've seen happen in the industry, in the juggling community, in my lifetime, several times. People will come out with a new design, a new club, and it won't be maybe the best version of that club, and you just say, man, how in the world did you spend so much money on this? And it's like, well, that was the chance we had, It's like, that was the process. It's like, you guess as good as you can, and then you just cash it out, and then you just hope it's good. And so this has definitely been a different process, and I really appreciated that, and yeah, I'm so happy that this exists. Cuphead 2.0.